Hi guys, and welcome back to JC Jog Support. If you haven't liked and subscribed, please do so now. Thank you very much. Now, what I'm trying to do with these videos is go over all of the units basically in kind of one go. So I've done two videos, if you haven't watched them already, on hazardous earth, one on climate change and hurricanes, and the other on tectonics and tectonic hazards. So I'm up to now unit 2 in paper 1, which is development dynamics, and it's my favourite part of the spec. I really like it, so let's get cracking. I'm basically going over processes and case studies and key terms and things like that, so you've got it all in one place. So let's see how we get on. So, right, development dynamics. Essentially, this unit is about poorer countries, LICs, how we measure development in those countries and what we can do to improve their economic development, essentially. So that's what the unit's about. So it's about Malawi and India, looking at a developing country as Malawi and an emerging country as India, and looking at how we can measure that they're rich or poor, and what the differences are between rural and urban areas, especially with India, and then what strategies can be put in place to make these countries more economically developed. So that's the basic principle of this unit. So let's go. First of all, we have got the first part of this unit, this topic, which is measuring development. So how do we measure development? Okay, so we've got lots of different ways that we can measure development. We've got economic measures, and we've got social measures, and we've got environmental measures. So the book goes through quite a lot. So development indicators can be economic, so they're to do with GDP, and they're to do with people purchase power parity, PPP, poverty line measurements of inequality, etc. So that is economic development. Social indicators are access to clean drinking water, education, access to healthcare, that kind of stuff. And then economic indicators will be looking at pollution and stuff like that. So there are development indicators. Now, they are single indicators. What we need to know for this is our multiple indicators, or composite indicators, and that would be HDI, the Human Development Index. And HDI is a culmination of GDP, which is how much money the country's got. And then we need to look at, if the country's got that money, is it spending it on its people? So we look at healthcare with that, and we look at education. So they're the three elements of HDI. Now, it's all very well and good a country having a lot of money, but if it doesn't spend it on healthcare and services, etc., then the people aren't going to be, benefiting from any money that the country's got. So that is HDI. The other thing that we look at in here is corruption and development. So I've got that here. So HDI, we've just gone over corruption. So certain countries are corrupt, although we do have to be careful because the corruption index is made by America, which inherently says that it's not corrupt, but it is. So every country is corrupt to a certain degree. So we have to be a bit careful with that one, but we do need to know what it is. So the more corrupt a government is, then obviously the more money the government's going to keep, and it's not going to give it to its people. The DRC is a really good example of this. It's got all of those minerals, got coltan and tantalum, but it's not, it's not spending that money that it gets for those minerals on its people, because it's corrupt. Poor governance is another element, not so much a corrupt government, but a poor government in terms of governance. Might not know how to spend that money effectively, and might not have processes in place to enable it to develop properly. And then we have got here, I'm just going to go over this, the happiness index, which is another way of measuring development, really, from a moral and ethical and mental health point of view. And that measures things like the environmental indicators and stuff like that. And Costa Rica is the country in the world that's the happiest. It's not necessarily the richest, but it is the happiest because people feel that they've got more social care, and they care for the environment more, and it gives them a sense of well-being. So that is their indicators. Okay, like I said before, demographic indicators as well. That's to do with birth rate, death rate, fertility rate, infant mortality, life expectancy. They are our development, our demographic. Now remember, demographic means population. So there are population indicators. I've skipped population structure, but they are our population pyramid. So in our textbook, I'm just going to show you this. We've got our pyramid for our poorer country, triangular shape, high birth rate, high death rate, poor healthcare, poor education. And then we've got our pyramid for our richer country, which is much more barrel shaped, really, isn't it? not as wide at the bottom because we're choosing not to have as many children, because women have got rights and things and alternatives, although we have not got equality yet, but don't get me started. And then high up here because we're living longer, and then it goes a little bit more tapered at the top. So this is more barrel shape, this is more triangular or pyramid shape. So there our population, that's our population structure. So obviously Malawi is going to look like a triangle and the UK is going to look more like a barrel. Okay, so population changes over time depending on your economic indicators having an impact on your social indicators. So we making more money and your government's not corrupt and it's got good governance, then you're going to be getting clean water and access to healthcare. Good education means that people go to school, get a better job, pay more taxes, etc. So it's an upward spiral. So it's the opposite of the poverty trap, or the spiral of poverty, or whatever it is. The other thing is women's health and education. So it's really important for women to be educated in order for the country to be developed. So that's another thing that you need to be aware of within this first part of the unit about how do we measure development. Okay, so I've rushed over that quite quickly. I don't think there's anything else there. Yeah, population structure, etc. So let's have a look now. So the next little bit here is we have to look at rich and poor, really. So we've got different types of country. So here we've got a big list. Okay, so this is kind of on a, well, it's not on a continuum because I haven't done it in the right order. HIC is high income country, like Europe and the UK and America, etc. Australia, low income country like Malawi and some sub-Saharan African countries, South American countries, middle income country, which are the BRICS essentially, so Brazil, Russia, India, China and some others. So those countries that have come from here to here because of TNCs and things. Newly industrialized countries we've got as well, just know that. Countries in Southeast Asia, newly industrialized. Then we've got RICs, which are different, and I forgot what they are. Recently industrialized countries. It's too many acronyms. Recently industrialized countries. So places like Brazil and Russia, and the BRICS could be recently industrialized as well. And then the term to know is emerging. Okay, so India here is your emerging country and Malawi is our low income or developing country. So we need to know those two terms, otherwise we'll get into all sorts of trouble. So now we're going to have a little look now at, so that's okay, middle income countries. There used to be a north-south divide, just know that. There used to be a north-south divide, rich north, poor south. But now there's a blurring of that old brand line. And with the emergence of the BRICS, etc., and the emergence of the Southeast Asian countries, etc., and the Asian tigers, so there's much more of a mix now between those countries. And although we still have rich and poor, and the gap between them is really high over the last 20, 30, 40 years, a lot of the countries have improved, but there's still a big gap between rich and poor. Okay, so Malawi we're going to look at as our main case study here. And Malawi I've got here. So Malawi's barriers to development. This is the bit that I quite like. So Malawi's got physical and political economic barriers to its development, stopping it develop. So from a physical point of view, Malawi is landlocked. Okay, so what's the significance of that? It's difficult to trade because it doesn't have a port, etc. It's got to go through lots of countries. It's only, got one railway line, so it can't get goods in and out very easily. So it's very difficult. It's rurally isolated. Many people live in rural areas, so it's very difficult to have have a lot of your population in kind of the secondary sector if most of them are living in the countryside. Obviously within that rural isolation we've got a lack of electricity, a lack of transport, a lack of internet and that kind of thing, so very much switched off if we were to look at it that way. Next is they're living with climate change. I know that's human, but the impacts are physical, so there's lots of variations in rainfall, etc., and lots of kind of pollution and stuff like that, so increased pollution as well. So human factors, bit more tricky than the physical factors. So our human factors. Okay, now if we remember, Malawi has very poor terms of trade. We need to remember what these are because they're quite important. So terms of trade means how much money you spend compared to how much money you earn. So if you don't have a job and you want to go out and it's coming up to Christmas or a birthday and you want to spend money but you haven't got a lot of money, you might need to borrow that money off your parents, and they will lend you that money. Maybe they won't put interest on it. They might make you do things like tidy your bedroom and stuff like that, but you will have not a lot of money of your own, but you'll need to buy presents and things like that, but you won't earn a lot of money. So Malawi's in a similar situation to you, but on a much bigger scale. So Malawi only sells primary goods, okay, and some manufactured goods, but it imports lots and lots of manufactured goods because it needs to, for its infrastructure, for its building, for its healthcare, for everything that it needs. It imports more than it exports, okay, and its exports are low cost because they are primary products and some manufactured goods. So if you're not selling stuff but you're buying stuff, then you're going to get in debt very quickly. So Malawi's got to loan from, you know, the World Bank and stuff like that, or other countries, and then it puts it into a lot of debt. So Malawi's terms of trade are really negative. Next is colonialization and cash crops. Now, colonialism, if you remember, something very, 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 very bad that the UK and other European countries did many centuries ago. We went to lots of countries around the world and we took what we wanted, essentially. And we colonised, we took over, we took the land, and we grew crops, and we brought them back to the UK, tea and coffee and things like that. So unfortunately, it's still happening now that Malawi's land doesn't belong to Malawi. It belongs to the landowners, to the TNCs now, to PG Tips, whatever it is. And they grow crops which are called cash crops, okay, which are sold for cash. But the Malawi doesn't take any benefit from that. The people work on the land, but for poor amounts of money and poor skills. And PG Tips, for example, will take that tea and take it back to the UK and sell it. So that's really difficult. They're commodities, and commodities means they're traded on global markets and price fluctuates, etc. We don't need to get into that. We're not economics, we're geography. And so Malawi farmers find this very difficult, and the cost of tea and coffee commodities can vary as well. This links to climate change, because if we have climate change and it gets hotter or colder or drier or wetter, then the price of these commodities will fluctuate. And if that happens, it's very difficult to plan what you're going to do with your economy, because you don't know what price you're going to get for those goods. So even if they do own the land and they do own the crops, then because they're commodities, it's very difficult to know how to plan for the future, because you don't know what that tea or coffee or cocoa or whatever it is going to get you, what money it's going to get you in the future. So colonialism has had a really bad impact. Now, neo-colonialism means that TNCs have gone in and they've taken over land, and they're growing crops, cash crops, and they're taking the profits out the country. That again is negative, and it means that Malawi never gets the chance to make any money and develop, which is a really negative thing. And then finally, the global trade and the role of the WTO, the World Trade Organization. Now, its role is to get rid of taxes and tariffs. So any goods that are manufactured, let's say in Malawi, can be taken to the UK and sold, okay, in a fair market. But that doesn't happen, because if we got stuff from Malawi, it would be lower cost than the stuff that we produce. So we put a tax or a tariff on it. And that means that we add a price, we add an amount to that to make it less attractive for our consumers to buy, unfortunately. So cocoa is a really good example of this. So if Ghana, for example, Malawi doesn't really grow cocoa, but if Ghana, which does grow cocoa, if it were to make its own chocolate, okay, with the beans that we use in Cadbury's chocolate, then if they made that chocolate, it would be lower cost, because cost of labour and everything is lower. So if they brought it to the UK, it would be 20 pence a bar or something. So that would probably be sold rather than Cadbury's chocolate, which is, I don't know, £1 a bar. I don't know how much chocolate is these days. And so everybody, or a lot of people, would buy the Ghanaian chocolate, and it would put Cadbury's out of business. So what the UK government does is it puts a tax or a tariff on it, and it says, right, you can sell that chocolate, but for every bar of chocolate, you're going to have to give us an extra 80p to make it comparable to our chocolate. And so that's really, really unfair. They're unfair terms of trade as well, to be honest. So that's really, really bad. So unfortunately, Malawi doesn't get to, it's got its tea and its raw coffee and stuff, but it doesn't get to process it. So it doesn't get to sell manufactured goods, where you add value. If you manufacture a good, you add value. The process adds value. So there are physical and human factors that have an impact on Malawi still being quite a low income country, okay? So that's that. Very negative. Right, so our next two things I'm going to consider our models. Now, if you want more detail on quite a lot of this, you can go to some other videos in my channel, and I've got a video on the roster model and Frank's model, and I've got a video on terms of trade, etc. So just go and check those out if you want it in a bit more detail. So Rostow's model, a couple of models now. Now these models are theories about how countries develop over time. Okay, and the first model, which is Rostow's model, Rostow did this quite a few years ago, and he said basically, if you remember from the picture, he said that all countries go through this. These stages of development, and they start off with a traditional society in agriculture, and then they move to the pre-takeoff where they start manufacturing little bits and pieces. Then they take off, they're manufacturing, they've got some services, and then we've got the drive to maturity where the industry really takes off, and we've got tertiary and the new economy started, and then we've got a stage of mass consumption where people start buying all this stuff, these services and these goods. And he says that every country goes through these 5 stages. That's not true. We went through these 5 stages because we had nobody who colonised us and took advantage of us and took everything from us. So we did that, but what he didn't factor in was neo-colonialism or colonialism, that we go to these countries and we halt their development. So a lot of poorer countries in the world in the past were halted at stage 2 because we went in, I didn't, but in the past, British people and that went in, they colonised, they took the land, they took the goods, so they stopped that country from developing. Okay, and you hear all kinds of stuff saying like, oh, in India, well, you know, we built railway lines and the British did this and that. Well, yeah, you might have, but you still stopped it developing. So, you know, colonialism, not great. So that's Rostow's model, and you need to be aware that not all countries go through those stages. Now, China's kind of broken through and India's broken through, but it's taken a longer time. Well, no, it's taken quite a short time, obviously, but it might have been quicker if we hadn't gone in and exploited it, etc. Because obviously they've developed a lot quicker than we did, but then we've got more technology now, etc. So that is Rostow's model, so you can critique that. And the next model, which is a little bit more up to date, is Frank's dependency model. So that's the one with the circles, if you remember, this one here, the core periphery. So this one is about a core, which is the richer countries, and saying that they need the periphery, which are the poorer countries, and they're dependent on each other, hence dependency theory. The core needs the periphery to stay poor because we need cheap raw materials, we need cheap access to cheap labour, we need all of that in order for us to stay on top. And Frank said that there is a relationship between the core and the periphery. We take raw materials from the periphery and we sell them back, manufactured goods at a higher cost. So again, it's in our benefit. I say I just mean high income countries, really, not me in particular, because I'm just a teacher. So Frank's model is a bit more up to date, but what he doesn't consider, he only considers rich and poor or core periphery, and what he doesn't consider is the rise of China and India and the BRICS. So that's a bit of a negative for his model, but we don't need to go into that in too much detail because it's GCSE. So there are models of development and how countries develop over time. Okay, now next one we're going to look at is globalization. So we are now looking at globalization. And what is globalization? Globalization is the interconnectedness of countries around the world, how they are interconnected. And the reason we are so much more interconnected now than we were 50 years ago is for many reasons, technical mostly. We've got better transport links, we've got aeroplanes, we've got fast trains, we've got containerization, which can bring stuff from all over the world. We have got technology, we've got the internet, we have got Skype. It's not even a thing now, is it now? We've got Teams, we've got Zoom, we've got telephones, we've got emails, we've got internet banking, we've got mobile phone banking, or mobile phones are computers. So we've got all of these ways that we can be more globalized, okay? We can have connections. Now, we've always been globalized because, like I said, colonialism, form of globalization. But now with neo-colonialism, with TNCs, we're still sending, our different parts of our manufacturing and processing around the world. So that's what globalization is. And so we've got increased technology, increased flows of money and people and goods around the world. And we've got outsourcing. So outsourcing is where we put part of the production into another country. So we go to, we go to India, as we'll look at in a minute, and we put our call centre there in an Indian office with Indian people. We outsource because it's cheap labour, etc. So that is globalisation. Now, foreign direct investment is where a TNC goes into a country and it invests in that country. So it will invest in a factory, it will invest in making a road or railway or an airport or something to help itself, basically, to exploit that country, I suppose, for what it wants, which is mostly cheap labour and cheap land. So that is that one. Let's have a little look what I've got. Yeah, Frank's model, HIC. I think I've got everything there. So yeah, the Clark-Fisher model we have. Oh yeah, the Clark-Fisher model. That's what we're up to. Getting far too fast. So the Clark-Fisher model. Now, Clark-Fisher model. Basically, these two economists come up with this, Mr. Clark and Mr. Fisher. I don't know what their names are, and they looked at change over time. Again, I've got another video on the Clark-Fisher model if you want it in a bit more detail. But basically, they're looking at primary, secondary, and tertiary and quaternary change over time. So it kind of links with Frank's model. Not Frank's model, the other one, the Clark-Fisher model. The Clark-Fisher model links with the Rostow's model, because in stage 1 of the Clark-Fisher model, we've got high primary jobs, because everyone's working in agriculture. You've got some secondary jobs and you've got a few tertiary jobs. Then over time, as you start selling more of those primary goods, you start maybe manufacturing them and processing them. So you're making a bit more money on them. You put that into education and health. That gives people better education and better qualifications, so you can start developing your country. That goes into stage 2, which is the industrial stage, which is kind of where China is, just moving out of that, where you've got mostly farming dips, because now you've got mechanization in farming and you start buying stuff from abroad as well. So you don't need so many people working in farming, and then most people are working in manufacturing, and then some people in tertiary because you've got extra money to spend on services and stuff. And then stage 3 is where you've got the UK and Europe and places like that, where you've got manufacturing mostly being abroad. You have the global shift of manufacturing abroad, mostly got like 2 or 3% of people in agriculture, because you either import your goods or you've got technology doing the jobs for you. Some secondary, because you have, but especially high level goods, but mostly you're sending that abroad, you're sending the processing abroad, and you've got most of your people working in tertiary. Now, the next thing you've got with that is you've got the rise of quaternary, which is kind of the new economy and the more technical finance, IT, pharmaceuticals, that kind of thing, where you've got educated people doing quite high level jobs. So that is the Clark-Fisher model. Okay, so that's how we move through. Again, it's like another way of moving through stages from being poor in stage 1 to being a bit richer. So your developing country in stage 1, your emerging country in stage 2, and your developed country in stage 3. Okay, so now we're going to look at India. So whereas Malawi was a developing country, don't get it wrong, India is an emerging country, which means it's moved from being poor, very, very poor, to being a bit richer. So India, right, okay, so India, large population. Why has India grown? It's got a very large population of young people mostly. So it's got a lot of issues, okay, but I'm just going to skirt over that for now, because in the exam you just need to know the main things for your questions. So India, large youthful population, which are a good workforce. Many people speak English as a result of colonialism. Okay, but then you can have a lot of call centres there and a lot of business there because people speak English. Lots of people working in the cities, lots of coastal areas, etc. So it's got, it's got a lot of positives. It's a democracy. It runs as a federation. That's a negative, but it runs as a federation, but it is a democracy, so it's stable. It's fairly stable. So TNCs are kind of attracted to it. And it's got very rich biodiversity in the world, on the world stage, etc. So it is emerging from its location point of view, from where it is located. That often comes up as a question. So it's located in the middle of the Indian Ocean, obviously. You've got to the east, you've got China and the markets there, and to the west, you've got Africa and access to the Suez Canal and into Europe. So from a strategic or a physical point of view, it's quite well located. It's coastal. It's got lots of coastline. So it's grown basically, and it's got those colonial links, which we did exploit the country, but it's also some of the reasons why it's growing now from being a low income to a middle income country. So globalization was also helped in India due to economic liberalization. So have I got economic liberalization actually written down? I'm not sure I have. Yes, I have. It's here. So economic liberalization. Economic, to do with the economy. Liberal means open door, like open door policy. So what happened here is during the 80s, what happened before that is the Indian government used to decide what got produced and who did it. They did it. They were in charge of a lot of the companies. But then, as globalization started, India and China both realised, we can get lots of TNCs coming here, lots of FDI, and we can start growing. So it opened its doors to TNCs, and it allowed TNCs to come in, okay, and open up there. So that's another reason why it was helped. Other reasons, good transport links, containerization happened, obviously. Big container ships can move things all over the world really quickly. Aircraft technology developed, bigger aircrafts and faster aircrafts, etc. And like I said, FDI and lots of companies there, BT, Oracle. There's lots and lots of financial companies, IT companies, technical companies in India, because although they've got 1.3 billion people, and 1 billion of them living in rural poverty, which we'll get to later. They've also got about 300 million people who are kind of middle class and are educated, who speak English. So there's room in the cities anyway for economic development. Okay, so the part that TNCs have played is that they have helped the cities grow, or parts of the cities grow, with call centres, software development, and other accounting, things like that within the cities. Outsource, and remember BT is your example here of outsourcing, or the new economy. So that's a positive thing. So it has grown. So India has had a lot of benefits from globalization and TNCs, even though if we look from a colonial point of view, we did exploit the country. There you go. Not great. So, right, India. So, winners and losers. Within the city, they're the winners overall. Countryside is obviously the losers, but you need a little bit more nuance there. So within the cities, you've got the rich people who are educated and have got good healthcare and have got good jobs. And then you've got the losers, who are the people who are working in the factories and being exploited, etc. And people who just haven't worked as well, because you've got a lot of migration. So you've got a lot of people who are working in the informal economy. So winners and losers there as well. The garment workers, they are earning more money than they would be in the rural countryside. They're not earning a lot of money, but they are earning more. But women have been some of the winners in a way, because they are now kind of freed up to get better jobs. Even though it's only working in a garment factory, I suppose it's better than them working or not working in a rural location, being really, really poor, even poorer. So we have to just say that there has been some advantages for women there. So there's winners and losers there. Right, so the next thing that we need to look at is core periphery. Okay, we've looked at core periphery already. Core is rich, periphery is poor. And here we've got our two little case studies here, Maharashtra and Bihar. So Maharashtra, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, I do apologise if I'm not. That's the urban core. That's a winner because it's coastal, it's the city, or it's got cities in it, that's where Mumbai is. It's got TNCs, it's got investment, it's got job opportunities, etc. for people. Although it's got negatives within it, because it's got shanty towns or slums, etc., which we'll look at in the next unit. So that's on the coastline. And then we've got a rural area, Bihar, which is further inland to the east. And that is a loser, obviously, because it's got the cycle of poverty. So it's got poor job opportunities, poor education, poor access to healthcare, poor access to clean water, no TNC investment, it's landlocked, it's poor transport links, etc. So it's definitely, that's an area that's losing. Okay, so yes, it's got a loss of biodiversity, it's got pollution and that kind of thing. The other thing is you just need to make sure that India's economic growth has got a lot of negatives as well. Water pollution, air pollution, loss of biodiversity, like I just said before. Okay, so that is our winners and losers. Now, the next little section is on how do we help the country to develop? How do we get it out of poverty? How do we get areas out of poverty? How do we increase economic development within countries? So we've got two schemes, haven't we? We've got top down, bottom up. Please make sure you know the advantages, disadvantages of top down, bottom up. Top down means that it comes from the government, means that it's imposed on people, means it's often gets countries in debt, because it is a dam here, but it might be a big infrastructure project that the country can't do itself, so it needs to loan money. So there's positives and negatives of top down. It doesn't take into account the views of local people or anything like that, but it does get foreign direct investment into the country, which in the long term can help the country develop. So the Sardar Sarovar Dam is an example of this, where the dam is being built and it helps generate electricity, which is reliable, which will attract TNCs. It will mean also that you can regulate water, that the water can be let out during dry season or held back in the rainy season during the monsoon season. Land can be irrigated, so it should increase agricultural production and things like that. So lots of positives, I suppose. But the negatives are that local people weren't consulted, people lost their land, there was loss of biodiversity when the river and the area around it was flooded, etc. And, people were displaced. So positives and negatives of our top-down approach. Okay, right, our bottom-up approach. Now, be careful with bottom-up. Bottom-up means lower level of technology, etc. But sometimes this is called intermediate technology. And there's just a slight nuance between the two. So I'll start with bottom-up, then we'll get to intermediate technology. So in the book, it talks about biogas. So we have got dung from cows, which is put into a tank, methane's produced, and then people can, in their homes, local people, especially in rural areas, can have access to electricity or lights. They can have access to heating and cooking. So they're not burning wood in their homes and getting lots of health issues, etc. So that's good, okay, and it's easy to for the local people to access it, etc. So bottom up is better for local people, but bottom up is not so good for the development of the whole country because it's only on a small scale. Okay, now intermediate technology, and this is important. Intermediate technology is another word for bottom up kind of thing, but it means intermediate technology means low levels of technology. So local people can access it. They can repair it if it goes wrong. They can, like I said, they can fix it. They can have dealings with it, if you see what I mean. So it's not like a big dam where like a local person couldn't fix a dam, but a local person could fix a little valve that went wrong on their biogas. So intermediate technology, you need to remember that because that comes up sometimes instead of bottom up. And you need to know that it's got low levels of technology so people can fix it. It's often sustainable, so it doesn't cause that much environmental damage, and it uses maybe local materials and natural materials. So again, local people with low skills can fix it and access it. So that's bottom up or intermediate technology. And they're both ways that the country can develop. Top down will help develop the country, I suppose, on a more large scale, but might not have a trickle down effect onto the poorer people, will help people maybe in the cities and in the core areas. And then the bottom up will help people individually, maybe in rural areas. So I reckon you need a mix of the both. So quite often you'll get an assess question on assess the impact of top down and bottom up. And the final section that we're going to do now is two things. India, the future of India. So the future of India. So India has got problems. It's got a young population, which is kind of good. But if you can't educate those people, then that's not a good thing. It's got 1 billion people living in rural poverty. It's a federation, so that means that each state makes its own decisions. So it's very difficult to get decisions made. It's a lot of bureaucracy and red tape, a bit like America. So it has its own laws. It has got poor access to clean water, which is a really bad thing. Climate change is going to have an impact on India. It's obviously got issues with Pakistan to the west, with Kashmir, with that disputed region there with Kashmir. So it's got a lot of difficulties. Okay, it's got a lot of positives because it's got a young population. It does have 300 million people who are educated and who speak English and can drive the economy. But obviously, those 1 billion people living in poverty, it's not great. And also, it's got TNCs there exploiting its workforce, etc. But, over time, like China, it will find its way. And then finally, you've got India on the world stage. So that's the final little bit that you're asked about sometimes. So where does India stand on the world stage? Well, it is part of the G20. And the G20 is the group of the 20 leading world economies that get together and discuss economic issues and kind of make, maybe agreements with each other and stuff like that. So it is part of that. So it's part of the G20. Also, it's now it can now support investment for the World Bank and development banks, such as the Asian Development Bank, to help economies around it. So it's part of that. It's given money to the World Bank and that to help other countries develop. So that's positive. And also, it's part of the United Nations Security Council, so it does have some kind of a say on a world stage. So you need that final section on India, which way next. You need to really know what the pros and cons of India are in terms of its population, its economy and that kind of thing, its physical environment, but also where India stands in terms of from a geopolitical point of view. and like I said before, is part of some of the bigger groupings, so that's a positive thing. So that is development dynamics. Look out for the next video, which will be the final one in this unit, which is challenges of an urbanised world.